Well, welcome everyone to the webinar, iManage Govern Records Manager, Top 5 Challenges and Solutions. I'm your host, Nitza Medina-Garcia. I own a company called InfoCompass Business Solutions, where I provide records management consulting. And funny, when I was preparing for today's webinar, I wanted to make sure that I had everything I need to provide you with value. Well, it reminded me of a time when I didn't have everything, and I was on my way to a consulting meeting in Paris, and I had to hop off the plane and freshen up and then immediately go to a meeting. Well, I began putting on my suit at the hotel, and I realized I forgot to pack my pants. So here I was, first time in Paris, no pants, and I needed to get to a meeting. Luckily, I found out there was a H&M store down the street, and I picked up a pair. Here's the good news. I verified we're all set to go for this webinar, so congratulations for attending. I realize some of you are already familiar with me, but for those who are not, here's a brief introduction. I work directly with iManage to design curriculum and conduct training for iManage Govern Records Manager, also known as IRM. I have 8 years of experience in implementing IRM. I am the only certified records manager that I know of that is doing IRM implementations. I not only provide technical expertise, I have a deep domain knowledge of the processes records managers care about. iManage and iManage partners contract with me to do Govern Records Manager implementations. That's a little bit about me. So my intention for this webinar is to increase your knowledge about the iManage Govern Records Manager software. I want you to get more out of the software you have. So I polled IRM users about their top 5 challenges, and what I repeatedly heard was, I don't know how to create retention schedules, I don't know how to manage electronic content, I don't know how to delete that electronic content, I don't know how to manage security, and I don't know how to create templates. So today, I want to show you how to do these functions within the Records Manager software. And if after today's webinar, you'd like to continue learning about the Records Manager software, I will have a special offer at the end. So let's go over creating a retention schedule. So before you create a retention schedule, you'll need to do a bit of discovery. You want to gather documentation. So if you have a retention policy or schedule information that's documented, you want to gather that information together before you start this process. So once you've gathered all that information, you're going to want to review the documentation, look at the record types you have, the retention periods that are listed, and what is being used as the retention trigger dates. You're going to look through that documentation and analyze it for that reason. Then you want to review your file plan and analyze its grouping. So file plan is basically how you're storing your files together, you know, by year, by a particular project grouping. So analyze how you currently have your information filed. So these are the 3 things you'll want to do before actually mapping it within the IRM software. So for those who aren't familiar, here's an example of what a retention schedule a records manager might have for our litigation records. Don't get hung up on the name. This could easily be called, you know, project records or claim records. Regardless, the records managers will have typically a whole spreadsheet with codes and names of records with their retention periods. And what you'll want to do is map this information to the IRM software. So here we see the code and the name, And that typically, well, here is the LIT001, the name is Litigation Matter Records. So the code normally gets mapped over to retention schedule ID, and the name is going to go to the name, so retention schedule. Now the retention period, you need to look and analyze that. So there's typically two parts to that. One is the date that is basically starting the clock, and then the actual period of time that you need to keep this. So these get mapped to a retention date and a retention period. So one of the key questions is to determine where that retention date is coming from. You know, can this date be automatically pulled from a matter management system or a project management database, or will this need to be manually entered? Or maybe there's a known date that can be used, like a creation date or modification date. So you're going to want to analyze your schedule to see, you know, what is this date? Where is it being stored? Is it being stored anywhere? Are we going to need to bring this in manually? So this ID and name get mapped to the IRM retention schedule. And then this retention date and the period, that gets mapped over to what's called a retention event within the IRM system. And so it is the combination of a retention schedule plus the retention event that is going to give you the working retention rule so that you can calculate how long items should be stored. In its simplest form, this is all you would need to create a functioning retention schedule in IRM. So basically, the retention name as well as that period together gives you that functioning rule. But if you'd like to manage all phases in a record's life cycle, you can certainly add more events to the schedule. As you see here, you can track 4 different phases of a litigation record life cycle. So you may have a business rule that when that matter closes, I want my files to state that they're inactive. Then maybe 30 days after that matter closes, you might want to archive the physical files off-site at a certain point. And so those two might be business rules that just happen to be your particular company or law firm. Then you might want to add a review event that basically reviews whether items should be approved for destruction. And then the last event, which is destroy, can be destroying only those items that have already been approved for destruction. So here we've actually expanded what was one rule into having 4 events. So we're tracking additional phases in a record's life cycle. So you can do both the official retention plus these business rules. In addition, you might want to add an event for every possible status. So what I mean here is, here's an example of lost and return to client. So I don't know about you, but there might be a time where a file might get lost. So you might need to have a status in the system that records that. So you'll want to add a lost event to your retention schedule. There also may be a time where you're transferring your files out of your organization. So in this instance, we have return to client. So you may want to record that in the system as well. So you'll want to make a return to client event. So please note that there might be some statuses that are not default within your IRM system. So if that's the case, you'll want to work with your IRM system admin to add in any additional statuses or event types in the Library Manager. So creating that retention event in IRM. So in order to do this, you would go to Desktop Professional. And within Desktop Professional, you have a administration dashboard. You would click the New button and Retention Event, And this is going to give you this form here. And in order to create any of these events or even schedules, you have to have a privilege called retention management in order to create any retention events or schedules. So to create this retention event, you're going to want to enter a name. So here I have review for destruction, matter closed plus 7 years. Then you want to enter in an event type. So just similar to my name of review for destruction, I have an event type called review for destruction. The third step is I want to select a record status to apply. So once I've processed this event, I want my file to have an updated status of approved. So I've gone through, reviewed all those files that need to be destroyed, and so the ones that got approved, I want to stamp those files with the approved record status. So number 4 is where I record that retention period and the retention date. So here I have it set for 7 years, and then the date field that I'm applying it to or drawing it from is called the matter close date. And so this field has dates on the file level as well as the matter level. So you can pick which date you need to use. In this case, I've used the matter close date. So that is really the main things that you would need to create an event in the IRM system. And in this example, I'm just giving you a really basic retention event. You can get fancy and add a prerequisite status if you want, so that in order for anything to be reviewed for destruction, you could add in some sort of prerequisite status of, oh, well, it has to have been inactive first before I do a review. I also X'd out the file part trigger date and the box retention date, as they're not needed for most event types. There's some special situations where we can use that. But I just wanted to keep this example simple. And so those 4 items that I have marked are really what you want to enter for most of your retention events. So then once you're done, you're going to select OK. And then you're just going to repeat. You're going to enter all the events needed for your retention schedule so that they're good to go when you actually create the retention schedule item. So creating that retention schedule, once again, you're going to go to that administration dashboard, new retention schedule, and you're going to enter in the retention schedule ID and name. You're going to add your events and click OK. So if you remember the example we had, LIT001, that's the ID. Your litigation matter records, I mapped this over to the name field. So that's the ID and name. And then as we go along, we'll add in the events that we need. So here I have my review for destruction, matter closed plus 7 years. And that's all you really need to create that retention schedule. And then you can click OK. But note, if you haven't quite figured out what your retention periods need to be, you could leave this event list blank and just have the ID and the name listed. Tag your files with this particular schedule. And then later on, when you finish your review, your research, and you've actually figured out how long you need to keep your records, you can go back in and add that event. So I think that's a neat feature because some of us may not have all of our schedules completed. And so at least we can tag our files with the name of the rule that we want to have as a placeholder, and then later we can go in and fill in those events. Okay, So now we want to talk about managing electronic content. So some notes about the electronic content. The Work DMS is the electronic records repository in the current version of IRM. I know in the IRM roadmap, iManage has said they will expand where records can be managed, like in SharePoint, but today it is the Work DMS. There is a service that automatically files work workspaces, folders, and electronic records. And for those who have an older version, Work is actually also known as Worksite. So you may already have that. There was a rebranding, so now it's called Work. But there's a policy service that automatically files those work workspaces, folders, and electronic records into the IRM system. And this is key because other software is dependent on an end user to file records into a separate records repository. And here we have a service that automatically does this with the Govern software. You want to note that IRM only contains metadata. The electronic records remain in Work and they're not duplicated in the IRM system. So let's look into an example of workspace. So here we have the Work DMS example. I have a workspace called InfoCompass Business Solutions Trademark Lawsuit. I have 2 files that are listed underneath attorney notes and correspondence. So the key for the integration between the Govern software and the Work software is metadata that's stored on this workspace. And the metadata is what is called Custom 1 and Custom 2 in the Work DMS. In this example, they've recaptioned it to client and matter. So this is Custom 1 and Custom 2. So these numbers here is what is key to that integration. So this is what's going to tell the policy service where to file this workspace in the file plan. So if we look at one of these folders, so here's the correspondence folder, and we look at the documents that are listed here, this correspondence folder has both undeclared documents as well as records. And so the records are going to have this lock on it, and so this is how you'll know that it's declared record because of this lock. And so when an item is a declared record, it means that the content of that item, so that email, that Word document, you can't change it, so that gets locked down. So remember how I said Custom 1 and Custom 2 are that client and matter codes? Well, that is what is being utilized to map to the Govern software. So this is an example of the Govern software. I have a client called InfoCompass Business Solutions. I have a matter called Trademark Lawsuit. And so it looks at those key codes or those IDs, and then it knows to file, and here's that workspace. It's listed as number 1. InfoCompass Business Solutions, here's those 2 folders, attorney notes, correspondence, and then we have some records here listed. So some of the requirements for integration is that IRM must have that corresponding file plan in place, so that's these top 2 levels before that workspace and its contents can get filed. So it needs to have these first 2 levels here in order to know when to file or where to file this workspace. And so this workspace is essentially just another folder within the system. And I have examples here. These are physical files above, and here's that electronic workspace. The other thing to note is that the Work DMS must have filed its documents at least within 1 workspace and 1 folder. So most organizations that are using the Work DMS are using a matter-centric model already. So they have that workspace and the folders viewable. For those that are using more of a classic mode, you don't necessarily have to show that workspace and the folders to the end user, but in the back end, we still would need that structure in order for the policy service to file within the governed structure. And then a nice to have is to have the document class that's within work mapped to a record type that is within govern. So if you have a document class of correspondence within your work DMS, you would want to have a correspondence record type within govern, so that when you're doing searches in govern and you want to find every record, regardless if it's physical or electronic, based on a record type, you're going to be able to use this validated metadata field to be able to do that search. So that's just a recommendation that I have. But then the other thing that I will also want to clarify is that these codes, if you're using leading zeros in order to list your numbers, the leading zeros would need to be both in govern as well as the work DMS, so that the filing can be appropriate. So if you have just the number 1 in work, but then over here in govern you have 0001, it's not going to match up. So that's just another tip there. Another thing I'd like to note is that you don't have to just map one work DMS to one instance of IRM. So if you have like a main work DMS library and an archive library, you can connect both of those to the IRM instance, and their workspaces will get filed within the govern file plan. And so remember, that integration is what's controlled. It's controlled by that policy service. So records declaration sources for electronic content. There's a couple different sources of how you can have records be declared, electronic records be declared, and that is from the work DMS. You could have individual user who declares a specific document as a record. You might have your workspace set up that your email folder may auto-declare anything that's filed in there as a record. So that's another way to do it. You might have some sort of imaging integration that's set to auto-declare that document as a record as soon as it gets filed into the workspace. So those are some ways from the work side where you can have items be declared as records. From the IRM side, you can do some bulk declaration. So from IRM, you could bulk declare all versions of work documents within a particular workspace or folder. So if that's a part of your cleanup process where you say, hey, everything in this workspace, when the project or the matter closes, need to be declared as a record, from the IRM system, your records administrator can bulk declare every single version of every single document as a record. If you think that's overkill, there's another way where you can just declare the last version of a work document as a record. And so it's only that last doc. You may have 5 different versions of a document, and the 5th version is the only one you want declared as a record. You can do that from the IRM system in a bulk way. Now, one thing you may want to think about is that you can, from the work DMS, there's a setting where you can state if there's a record declaration grace period. So you may want to set it for 24 hours, and this would help for people who accidentally declare a certain document as a record. Maybe their cursor slipped and they selected the wrong one, or they weren't, really paying attention. So instead of having help desk tickets going, or them calling your IT department and saying, hey, can you undeclare this for me? I made a mistake. You could put in a grace period in there so that they can do that themselves. And so maybe, after either 12 hours or 24 hours, it gets locked down, and that's permanent. So how exactly do you do records declaration? So from the work side, you would select the work document, right-click on it, and there's an option that says Declare as Record. And so you'll just want to confirm that. And once you confirm it, it will then be locked down and it gets that red lock that I showed you earlier. If you're doing it from the IRM side, you can select that workspace or folder in the file plan. You right-click on it, Dispose Records, and you confirm that yes, you do want to dispose of them. And even though we're saying dispose in the Records Manager software, dispose really just means a change in record status. So I know that's a little bit of a challenge for records managers when they hear dispose. They think, oh, that's the last thing that can happen to my record. But the vocabulary that they're using in this software, dispose, just means being able to utilize one of our retention events. So you select the event type, and if you want to declare every single version of every single document as a record, you can select that Declare All, and then that will declare every single document as a record in that workspace. And so reminder, if you want to be able to do this, you need to create that event in your retention schedule. Create the event, add it to the retention schedule for your litigation matter records. Okay, so just a hint there. Now, if you want to declare only the latest version, you would select Declare Latest. And so that would only declare the last version of a record, of a document as a record. Something that's new for version 6.3 of the IRM software is that they've added, by default, these two fields of authorized by. So you can select a person's name if you want to be able to connect it with this particular event, as well as comments. So this is very useful for maybe destruction. You want to record who authorized a destruction, or any additional comments. So that is something that gets stamped in the audit trail once you do the process. So you select your event type. If you want to, you can add authorized by and comments, and you click the process button, and then that is what sends the action via the policy service back to the work DMS. And so it's going to either do the Declare All or the Declare Latest. One thing I do want to note, we've been talking about records declaration, and I just want to note that work documents do not need to be declared as a record in order for IRM to govern their life cycle. So if you're saying, Nitza, our people, we don't declare records, we just leave our workspace as is, that's fine. So we can still select that workspace, select that folder within the records file plan, and at the end of its life, when it's matter closed +7, when it's eligible for that destruction, we can still do the destruction from the governed software. So that's fine. So deleting that electronic content. So there are some drivers in regards to destruction, why you'd want to do any sort of destruction. And so the first one might be a workspace cleanup. So maybe at the end of the matter or the end of the project, you have some drafts that are in that workspace and you want to get rid of it. So in the physical world, what we used to do, right, is we have the folders, we kind of look through the folder, pull out those drafts, and we only send really the core file to be stored in the record center or in offsite storage. Well, if you want to be able to do that sort of cleanup, you can do that sort of cleanup using the record software. You can also do workspace destruction at the end of retention as well. So if you need to be able to destroy a workspace at the end of the records life cycle, you can do that as well. So there's the work DMS that can have, you can have ad hoc destruction governed by the work settings. So if I'm an end user and my administrator for the work DMS has went ahead and set the settings so that I could destroy items, that will be a capability that I can do within the system. Some organizations have listed the like a third-party tool, like a soft delete. So that's another tool that for those items that are not declared as records, they're basically just documents. Those items can be destroyed via the work DMS. From the IRM system, you actually can destroy a workspace, folders, or electronic records. And so that can be done just as a part of your retention schedule lifecycle. Then lastly, you can destroy any undeclared documents from the work DMS. And so that can be done, once again, selecting that workspace or that folder, and anything that's undeclared within that container can be destroyed via the IRM policy service. So how do you do that destruction? So within the workspace, you can select that work document, right-click on the menu, and select delete from that right-click menu, and that's what's going to allow you to delete. So once again, that's governed by your work DMS settings, whether you can do that or not. Then next, we have the IRM workspace. You can select from the IRM file plan the workspace or the folder, and then you right-click on the right-click menu. Once again, you select Dispose Records. You confirm, yes, you want to dispose, and then you're going to select the event type. And so there's 3 event types that you can utilize. One is Destroy. So if you're going to use Destroy, that is going to allow you to destroy the work, whatever you've selected, so the workspace, the folders, or the declared records. You can destroy undeclared items, so anything that is not declared as a record, you could destroy those items, so that's more for those workspace cleanups. Then you have what's called a declare destroy combo. So if you want to declare that last version of a document as a record and then destroy any of those other versions, then utilize the declare destroy combo, and that does it in one step. So when I do a destruction, what happens? So the policy service is going to send a disposition action to the disposition processing queue. And so you'll see that action from the administration dashboard. There is a spot called disposition processing. So if there's anything waiting to happen, so that destruction for the workspace, folders, records, that is going to be listed under that disposition processing. And so as those actions get sent over from the govern software to the work DMS, it's going to go and destroy items from the lowest level to the highest level. So it's going to go from the record, then the folder, then the workspace. That destruction happens in the background, so you can continue working in the govern software. It's not going to stop you from continuing and doing other functions. And so by default, when the workspace folders or electronic items are destroyed, what it does is here in the record status for these items, so here's my workspace, my folders, my declared record, they all get an updated status of destroyed. In the audit trail, it's going to show when this happened, you know, who instituted it, what day. If you had those authorized by and comments, that would be recorded as well in the audit trail. But when we were to look back into the work DMS and look for this particular workspace, that workspace would be gone. So the workspace, the folders, and those declared records would be gone. So my recommendation is that if you're going to be instituting that electronic integration and you want to be able to do destruction for those electronic records and content and workspaces, I'd recommend using a two-step retention event destruction. So create an event that's a review for destruction, and then create a destroy event and have that destroy event have a prerequisite status of approved for destruction. That way, only items that are pre-approved would be destroyed, because you don't want to accidentally destroy a workspace before it's time. Okay, so now we're going to go to Manage Security. Manage Security, you do this in two ways. So the most common is to use membership policies. So most firms and companies use this. But if you have a really granular security requirements, you may need to use security policies, and those are on a folder by folder basis. But in any event, they're basically using the same form in order to create the membership policy. So this basically says, you know, who has access to this item in the file plan. So if we look at our normal file plan, so in the generic version, you know, out of the box using the IRM system, generically it's the first level of the file plan is called series, the second level is called category, and then everything underneath is called a record. In a law firm version, you would have the first level being called client, second level being called matter, and then the third level and below, they're all called file parts. And so the security that's managing these levels of the file plan, at least on the first and second level, is going to be your membership policy. And then the third level is going to be your security policy, so third and below. So in order to create a membership policy, you're going to go once again to that administration dashboard, new membership policy, and you're going to need to have the managed security privilege in order to do this. And so from there, you'll be able to create a new membership policy. For security policies, they already have some default policies in place. By default, any files that are created under a matter or category are set to have a public security policy, which basically just means as long as you have access to that matter or category, you can see all the files underneath it. There is a private security policy, which means that only the person who created that item could see it. And then there's view, which means it's read-only. So you can see that it's there, but you couldn't edit any of the metadata. Now, if you need a custom policy, you can create a custom security policy on the category or matter basis. And the way you do that is you right-click on a matter or a category, and then you select Manage Security Policies. And so then you would just set up the policy according to your needs. So how do you set up that policy? So regardless if it's a security or a membership policy, it's really just the same form. And so what you do is you want to have a name. So here we have general is what I put as the name. You're going to want to select a default access. So maybe for everybody, you want to be able to allow them to see it, but they can't change it. So I have it set to view. So then under the members list, this is where you would have exceptions to that default access. So maybe I want to give more privileges to the records clerks, the records managers, or Mr. Gary Cooper here. So if I want to add more access level, I can specify this in the access level settings. And as you go down this list, you're getting more privilege. So as you add people in, you're going to want to assign an access level to each one of these members. So a common flavor of a membership policy is what's called an ethical wall. So common in law firms, you may have reason to block a certain associate attorney from seeing certain files so that there's no conflict of interest. And so you need to block a certain person or maybe a group of people. So you would set up the policy as normal, just like we did in the last version, but then you're going to want to add the person or the group that has that block against them, and you're going to want to set their access level to deny view. So here we see deny view in this area right here. So that's what blocks them from being able to see. So the user's not going to be able to see the file part in IRM or even the client or matter in IRM. They're not going to be able to request any files be delivered to them. And then if anybody tried to do a checkout for them, that would be denied as well because there's an ethical wall. Now you may want to create another flavor called departmental. So within departmental, maybe the HR department, you need only them to see their own files and not the rest of the company. So you would create a separate departmental policy. You can set the default access to no access, and then those who should be able to see, you would want to list them in the members list and set their access level. So one note is that you may need to create a trustee group in Library Manager in order to equal the department. So if you don't have that group, that special department listed out, you may want to create that in Library Manager so that you can select that group from the members list. Okay, so that was policies. Now we're moving on to creating templates. So to create a template, you need to create what's called a standard grouping. And then within that standard grouping, you're going to set what file part templates you want within that standard. And if you want, you can actually create a child file part template as well. So maybe you have a folder, and I create a template for a folder, and then I won't have a subfolder that I put inside of it. I can create that subfolder as a template as well. So we can recreate that hierarchy. So in order to create that standard within the governed software, we're going to go to that administration dashboard. We can go to the standard area and select new, and this is going to pop up this new standard form. And so what you're going to want to do is name the standard, and I typically name it the same as either the practice area or the function that I'm doing. So here I have a litigation standard, and so the practice area or the function that I'm using is litigation as well. So there's no surprise. I know litigation equals litigation. So another thing that I look at is if you have a work DMS and you're using some sort of value to generate your workspace template, I like to use the same value in the governed software as well, so that we're standard across both systems. So if you're using practice area to generate the set of folders on a specific type of workspace within the work DMS, I'm going to want to use that same value to present the templates in the governed software. Yep. So to create a template, what I would do is I would double click on that standard name, and then I can select new and then template, and then it's going to give me this form. And in this form, the first item, I'm going to specify the template name. So I'm going to call this one Attorney Notes. And the second item, I'm going to determine the file part ID. So I'm going to click Automatically Assign File Part ID. And then under File Part ID Prefix, you can specify if you want a prefix for your folders. What's nice about putting a prefix is that your folders can be grouped together according to that prefix. So all of my Attorney Notes folders can be grouped together when I sort them within the list in the file plan. I can also put in the minimum number of digits. So most common is 3 digits. And here's an example, ATT001. And so I've only known of maybe one customer that's actually needed 4 digits, where they may have, you know, over 1,000 volumes of this particular type of record. Otherwise, I think 3 digits is pretty good. So once you specify that, you get your preview. The next thing is the name rule. And so you get 3 options. And so the name rule is going to govern what name is presented when a user is going to create a file using this template. So I have suggested attorney notes here under the name. And so if I would have selected read only, that would lock down the name to just attorney notes. And so if a person wanted to create a file using this template, they wouldn't be able to change the name at all. So it'd be hard-coded in. If I want to say, you know what, I want it to start with attorney notes, so the name has to begin with attorney notes, but if they want to add to it, I can have it be listed as append. Now, if it's caution to the wind, I can suggest attorney notes, but you know they want to erase it, that's fine with me. Then I would put read write. And so that would allow them to erase attorney notes and put whatever name they want for this item. So that's up to you and your standards. So the next thing I would select is media type. And here I have jacket selected. You can select whatever type of container you're using for this template. And then what I'd like to do is to automatically specify record type of attorney notes as well. So that way my user who's going to create the file using this template, they don't have to remember to put in attorney notes. They don't have to remember to put in the media type. This is all going to be pre-filled for them. Okay, so let me actually get up to where I am. So the next thing that's optional is retention schedule, and this all depends on how you're assigning your retention. So there is a way where you can actually assign a retention schedule by virtue of the template metadata. So when that person creates the file, the retention schedule gets stamped on it automatically. So if that's how you want to do it, you can add it here. You can also auto-generate this item as soon as the file gets entered into the file plan. So a new matter comes into the system. I want an attorney notes folder to be created right off the bat. So if you want that to happen, you would select the auto-generate item. But I'm going to leave that blank. But I do want to be able to circulate this using a barcode. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and that's going to give me a barcode for this item. And then I would normally click OK. So then once that's set up, your end user can then go into the governed software, and they would select new file part from template, and this is going to pop up this form. And because this matter was a litigation matter, the litigation standard shows up, and then any sort of templates that I've created, so I've only created one here, but if I had more, I would be listed here. And so the end user would just select which one they want, and then see here, I had it set up as append. So then this attorney notes is going to be hard-coded at the beginning, and then the end user can add their information in. Typically, the office and responsible attorney are going to be inherited down from the matter, so that's pre-populated. You don't have to worry about that. So the only thing your end user would normally enter in is the home location. And so if they're always creating items for the same place, like they're always creating files and they're going to get stored in the file room, they can lock that value into this field. I don't know if you can see, but it's actually yellow here because I've locked that value in. So if you want to lock a value in, so the next time you open up this form, it's locked in there, you would just click Control-L on your keyboard, and that will change that to yellow. If you want to unlock it, it's Control-U. So L for lock, U for unlock. And so then you also see the ID is already showing you what the format's going to be. So this is all your end user has to do. Click OK, and then the information regarding the record type, the media type, we have pre-filled the name. A lot of this information is already pre-filled for your end user. So, so your end user is going to have less fields to fill out than the basic file part form. So that's templates. So to review, in today's webinar, I covered the top 5 challenges for IRM users. We talked about creating retention schedules, managing electronic content, deleting electronic content, managing security, and we just went over creating templates. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending the webinar, and I hope you have a wonderful day.